But in thinking about research problems, there are a couple of things, or research design, there are a couple of things to think about as things that aren't necessarily suitable for research problems. First of all, it's not really a research problem if you just want to explore some things to become self-enlightened. Not necessarily a bad goal. Knowledge is a good thing, but it's not really a research problem. Research problems should have some sort of significance beyond just your own personal self-enlightenment. Now, research, yes, can make you a better person, depending on what you're researching, can provide you with skills that will better your vocational goals. But that shouldn't be the ultimate goal when it comes to research. Right? And so a research problem is not about self-enlightenment. A research problem is not solely about comparing two sets of data. And so I have this biographical information about this individual and this biographical information about this other individual. I'm going to compare and contrast their lives. Again, could be a very useful exercise. Could be a very interesting exercise. It's not really a research problem, though. Now, if you had something as to what this is going to help you discover, right, something larger, then it might be, you could turn it into a research problem, but just saying, you know, I got these two people that I'm interested in, and I'm going to compare and contrast their lives. That's not really research. That's just information gathering. You've kind of gotten to maybe some analysis if you're actually comparing and contrasting, but you might not even be getting to that aspect. Simply doing statistical work or suggesting how things correlate aren't, those processes are not suitable research problems. Now, what does this statistical work tell you? Right? If you're doing some sort of research project related to, let's say, effective preaching in urban congregations. What types of preaching are going to be most effective in an urban type of congregation? Part of that might involve some statistical work, right? Examining the makeup of various urban congregations, median income, comparison between male and female, all sorts of demographic things, but that's not your research problem. And so just finding out the makeup of urban congregations may or may not be research. So again, that might be a component of how you answer a research problem, but it's not going to be a research problem on its own. And then finally, any sort of question you can answer with a yes or no type of question, type of answer, is not really research. It's just gathering information. And so, when thinking about what your research problem is, what is it you're investigating? You have to have something, you have to recognize that these are the things that are going to be complex. Research has to be about more than just your own personal self-enlightenment, more than just the comparison between two things, more than just even saying there's a correlation between these things. So it's important to discover a research problem that is worthwhile investigating. In moving from beginning to end, there are a couple of steps that you should take in your research project. First of all, is developing that research question. What is it that you are really looking into? And so things like, does John 8 belong originally in the Gospel of John? That's the question I have. But moving from that question, you don't want to just have that question. You also have to recognize that you have to be able to articulate the problem. Because does John 7:53 through 8:11 belong originally in the Gospel of John? Is a yes or no question. But the research problem is actually larger than that. And it has to do with manuscripts, it has to do with transmission. And so you have to be able to move from just the question you're interested in to articulating what's the problem. What's the bigger issue that's addressed or related to that particular issue. Once you have discovered, constructed, articulated your research problem, then you begin gathering your data. And this is important to think about in your research design. What is it? What information will answer my question or relates to this problem? That way you know where to go for your data. And so gathering that data is an important part of that information. Important part of the process. But once you've gathered that data, right now you just have this kind of unorganized data. You need to do something to organize this data so that it tells you information. So again, for the issue that we're looking at, right? Here's data related to why it should belong. Here's data related to why it doesn't belong. Right? And so here, now that looking at this data that says it should belong, right? So I've organized it between belongs, doesn't belong. All right. What are some of the things about this data that says it belongs? What are the things that it points to? All right. So here are three basic areas where people who say belongs are, three criteria. Here are three criteria of data related to it doesn't belong, right? Some manuscripts don't have it, it moves around, right, etc. So you organize your data. Right? I got all this data, all this information I've discovered. Right? Now I got to organize and think about, okay, what are the relationships between data? What do they break down into categories, right? Where some people say this, some people say this, some people say this. Then you move to interpreting that data. Which is more important, for example? What kind of information is most useful in addressing your research problem? Looking at the data, what does it tell you? Which way does it lead you? Which direction should you follow? And all of that is part of interpreting the data, discovering what it is that the data is telling you, the significance of this data. And then finally, developing an argument. This is an especially important part of research. Based on your information, based on the data that you've collected, what are you trying to say? You should have in your research papers some sort of argument. Not just, I'm going to take you on a voyage of discovery. Not, I'm going to look at all of these things, or I'm going to explore this. An argument. Something clearly definable, a thesis that says what it is you plan on arguing. Something that could be clearly defined. Something that somebody reading your paper could know exactly what you're trying to say. Questions so far? Anything we need to clarify about the research process or research in general? Now, for this class, of course, I've simplified the process of choosing a topic by giving you specific verses, right? You got to choose from these set of verses. But in other classes, you're going to be given very broad instructions. choose something related to church history, a passage in the Gospel of Matthew, some sort of thing related to ministry. And so there are going to be other classes, other times where you're going to have to discover and choose a topic on your own with very little guidance from the professor, which means that you have to have some way of choosing a topic. So how do you go about choosing a topic? Well, first of all, having an idea of what it is you're going to do, right? Okay, I have to do something in the Gospel of Matthew. Spend some time reading. And so, for example, if you are in a Gospel of Matthew class and you're given the assignment to do a research paper on any passage in the book of Matthew, one way to choose your topic is to pick up a commentary, start reading. Pick up some other thing about Matthew and start reading. And thinking about, and just exposing yourself to things about your topic. If I'm supposed to do a paper on church history, I read through the textbook that I have. Is there anybody here that's particularly interested in? Is there any specific time period I'm particularly interested in? So reading can help you determine some things that you are interested in. But while you're reading, also asking questions is helpful too. What is it that is really particularly interesting about this person or this passage or whatever it is that I'm looking at? And so as you're trying to choose a topic, you have to think about what are the questions that I can ask about this topic, or about this information. What are some things I would like to know more about? Right? Here, I'm reading this textbook for this church history class, and I come across 2 paragraphs on this particular person, and it just sounds so interesting. So why is this person interesting? What is it about this person? Is it the time period? Is it what they were involved in? Right? So what kind of things do I want to know? But then it's also important to, as you begin to think about that and begin to ask questions, narrowing your topic. Focusing on something specific about that person or about that passage that is particularly interesting to you. Right? And so, you're in the Gospel of Matthew class, you're told you have to do a paper on Matthew, you're reading through Matthew, and you come across, if your right hand offends you, cut it off. If your right eye offends you, pluck it out. Whoa, what's that all about? Right. Okay, so what is it that is particularly interesting to me about this passage? And so now I'm narrowing it down. Do I want to just focus on this particular passage, or is there something more general, self-mutilation in the Bible? Right? So thinking about narrowing your topic down. But then also, in thinking about narrowing your topic down, you also want to think about some things you're not going to talk about. And so in thinking about John chapter 8, a woman taken in adultery, I'm going to focus on the issue of whether or not this passage belongs here. So I'm not going to spend talking about what this shows us about Jesus' character. I'm not going to spend it talking about Jesus' interactions with women, unless that specifically relates to my topic. And so in talking about this, I'm not talking about these other things. And the reason you do that is so you don't spend time wasting your time, essentially, asking and reading about a bunch of information that ultimately isn't going to get you to your goal. So in choosing a topic, there's a couple things to keep in mind. Research is going to go a lot more easily if you choose something that is interesting to you. So while a professor's assignment might be very general, going to a professor and saying, could you just give me a topic? While a professor might be able to do that, it's going to be a process that is more useful for you, is going to be more enjoyable to some extent, if you can find something that is of interest to you. So spending that time asking questions, reading, investigating, narrowing down. So you find an interest. You narrow that to a topic. You ask questions of that topic. And then finally think about, okay, what am I going to do? What is it that I'm going to do? Why is this important? What are the kind of things that I'm trying to work out? So how do I go about narrowing the topic? I have a very broad thing. I want to do something, about the history of Christianity. And I've started reading, and so I'm really interested in this particular individual. And as I'm looking at, there's something about the individual's views on whatever issue. All right, so how do I narrow that to the topic?